On January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. Within a year, he had consolidated absolute power in his hands. On January 1934, after President Paul von Hindenburg died, Hitler combined the offices of Chancellor and President, thus assuming the title of Der Führer. He then embarked on a path that would lead his nation into World War II and bring about the Holocaust. When we look back at this dark period of history, it can be easy to wonder how things got so bad. How did a charismatic yet bumbling buffoon come to control one of the most powerful nations on earth? And how did an educated and cultured society allow itself to fall under the sway of such a nefarious dictator? To answer these questions, let us examine the conditions that allowed Hitler to take power and the strategies he used to maintain it once he had it. In order to understand how Hitler seized power, we must first look at the state of post-World War I Germany. The war had been devastating for the German people, leaving them weakened and disillusioned. The Treaty of Versailles, which ended the conflict, placed sole responsibility for the war on Germany and forced them to make territorial concessions and pay heavy reparations. This left many Germans feeling humiliated and resentful. Into this volatile mix came the Great Depression. As the world's second-largest economy, Germany felt the effects of the Depression more acutely than most nations. Unemployment skyrocketed and social unrest increased. People were desperate for a solution to their problems and were willing to listen to almost anyone who offered one. Enter Adolf Hitler and his Nazi Party. Hitler had been driven by anti-Semitism and a desire for power since his university days. But it wasn't until the economic collapse of the early 1930s that he gained any traction. His nationalist rhetoric resonated with those who felt victimized by the Treaty of Versailles, and his promises to restore economic stability appealed to the unemployed masses. By 1932, the Nazi Party was the most popular in Germany. Hitler was riding a wave of momentum and was poised to take power. But there was one obstacle in his way: President Paul von Hindenburg. A decorated World War I general, Hindenburg was immensely popular in Germany and seen as a symbol of the nation's past greatness. Hitler knew that he could never hope to win an election while Hindenburg was in office. So he decided to bide his time and wait for the president to die. And that's exactly what happened on August 2nd, 1934. With Hindenburg out of the picture, Hitler's path to dictatorship was clear. He wasted no time in consolidating power. One of his first acts as president was to appoint himself as chancellor. This may seem like a small distinction to make, but it was actually a very significant one. As chancellor, Hitler was head of the executive branch of government, but he still had to share power with the legislative and judicial branches. In order to become a true dictator, he needed to eliminate these other centers of power. The first order of business was to get rid of the parliament. Hitler had never liked democracy, and he wasted no time in dismantling it. On February 27, 1933, he had the parliament building set on fire. Though a Nazi himself, he blamed the communists for the attack and used it as an excuse to suspend civil liberties. With the opposition silenced, Hitler had the parliament vote him emergency powers. These powers proved to be very useful as they allowed Hitler to rule by decree, bypassing the parliament altogether. The next step was to eliminate the judiciary. Hitler accomplished this by appointing judges who owed their position to him rather than the state. This ensured that the courts would rule in his favor whenever a case involving him or the Nazi Party came before them. Finally, the press was brought under the control of the government. Newspapers that opposed the Nazis were either shut down or bought out. Those that remained were forced to print only pro-Nazi stories. Any form of dissent was effectively silenced. Opposition to Hitler wasn't completely crushed, but it was severely weakened. There were still a few holdouts, notably the Social Democratic Party, but they lacked the power to do anything. Hitler had complete control over Germany. He was the unchallenged leader of the nation, and he would remain that way for over a decade. So how did Hitler maintain his grip on power for so long? The answer is propaganda. From the moment he took office, Hitler embarked on a campaign to win the hearts and minds of the German people. He did this through a variety of means, but the most effective was film. Movies had been popular in Germany since the early 20th century, and Hitler knew this. He used this to his advantage by producing films that glorified the Nazi Party. The most famous of these films was Triumph of the Will, which documented the 1934 rally at Nuremberg. The film was a masterpiece of propaganda, portraying Hitler as a messianic figure and the Nazi Party as one united and unstoppable force. It's been called the greatest propaganda film ever made, and it played a huge role in maintaining Hitler's power. Another tool Hitler used to great effect was radio. He gave frequent speeches over the radio, which were broadcast into every home in Germany. During these speeches, he would rally the population around the Nazi cause and denounce his enemies. The radio was also used to disseminate news and information in a controlled manner. Only approved stories were broadcast, and any mention of the war or the depression was kept out. This ensured that the German people only heard positive news about the country and the Nazi Party. Finally, Hitler used the schools to indoctrinate the next generation of Germans into the Nazi way of thinking. He implemented a new curriculum that glorified the Nazi Party and taught children to be obedient little soldiers. Teachers were required to swear an oath to Hitler, and any who didn't comply were fired. This ensured that the schools were a breeding ground for future Nazis. Thanks to these tools of propaganda, Hitler was able to maintain his power for over a decade. The German people were kept in the dark about the horrors being committed by the Nazi Party, and they rallied around Hitler's charismatic leadership. But eventually, Hitler's hubris would lead him to make a fatal mistake that would cost him everything. Hitler's downfall began with the invasion of Poland. On September 1, 1939, this act plunged Europe into World War II and marked the beginning of the end for Hitler. The war was unpopular from the start. The German people knew that they were fighting a just war, and the casualties began to mount. Morale plummeted and dissent began to grow. This was made worse by the Allied bombing of Germany. As the war dragged on, the bombs fell, and the people of Germany grew increasingly disillusioned with Hitler. They had been promised victory after victory, but instead they were stuck in a bloody stalemate. Rumors began to circulate that Hitler was losing his grip on reality. His behavior became more and more erratic, and he made several disastrous decisions, such as the invasion of Russia. By 1945, the writing was on the wall for Hitler. Germany was losing the war, and the German people were ready to move on. When the Russians entered Berlin in April 1945, it was clear that Hitler's time was running out. On April 30, 1945, as the Russians closed in, Hitler took his own life. The Third Reich was over, and with it, the era of Nazi Germany had come to an end. Though Hitler is long dead, his legacy lives on. The horrors of the Holocaust and the devastation of World War II are a reminder of the evil that this man was capable of. But Hitler's rise and fall also teach us valuable lessons about the nature of power and the importance of resisting tyranny. We must never forget the lessons of the past if we hope to prevent the future. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and leave a comment below to let me know what you thought.